Hello. So, right to start, hopefully everyone can hear us okay. So welcome everyone, my name is Patrick Sullivan. I'm an education psychologist that works for the Education Psychology Service in Tower Hamlets.
Hi everyone, my name's Lorna Franey. I'm an education psychologist in Tower Hamlets Educational Psychology.
So last week we talked a bit about safeguarding your own emotional well-being, kind of working on resilience for yourselves as parents, as carers, as adults, and today we're going to be talking about how to support your children's well-being. So we're going to start off by kind of thinking about some of the psychological frameworks we talked about last week, and we talked a bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which looks at a pyramid in terms of basic needs at the bottom of the pyramid. Then it moves on to sense of belonging, self-esteem, self-worth, and at the top is the area of need which relates to learning, and I suppose our ability to regulate ourselves and to learn from others. So just like that's relevant for adults and individuals, it's also relevant for children. But what's really important for children is a lot of the basic needs and fundamental needs at the bottom of the pyramid are only achieved via support of the adults around them, be it parents, carers, and also the adults that are caring for them during the day at nursery, preschool or school. And sometimes those fundamental factors can be overlooked somewhat. Sometimes when a child is expressing anxiety, anger, frustration, we sometimes overlook some of those basic factors which are somewhat being compromised. So if we think, for example, about sleep and the importance of sleep and how sleep may have been disturbed over recent months because of change of routine, the fact that children don't need to get up at a set time for school may mean that they're allowed to sleep longer, which then changes their sleep drive in general, which means that they are less likely to want to go to bed at a reasonable time the evening before. So if we can think about protecting sleep for children, for example, we can work at that basic level, which then means we're taking positive steps to look at the higher order needs. And there are a couple of frameworks, or one framework in particular, which myself and Laura will attach as note forms for you to look at in your own time. But there was a framework called the resilience framework, specifically the academic resilience framework, and you can find that on the website Young Minds. And it really lays out all of these different needs at different levels that children will experience. And it can really help identify where a child or young person may be having gaps, which means that you as parents, carers can then try and target those gaps in order to support overall resilience and support overall positive mental health. So when we think about the current times of COVID-19, children, for example, have been out of routine. They have been, sorry, I'm just reading Name's point, there's a lot of feedback. I don't know if it's at my end or not. I think it is. When we think about where children have been recently, in terms of not being at school, not being at settings, then we have to try and think about how we can help them connect with friends in another way. And sometimes that's about using social platforms with their permission, and also trying to make sure that they feel a connection to their learning in general. So we know that schools have been doing their best to try and send them back home, but for very young children that may have been attending playgroup sessions, that has been challenging, and it's been challenging for parents to try and think about creative ways of supporting their child's learning, especially when people have been found it difficult to go outside because of the restrictions, etc. So I think what we need to think about now is, and I think Lorna and I will talk more about this as we go forward, is as we move to more flexible way of living, because certain restrictions have been lifted, it's trying to make the most of that, to be creative, and to allow children a safe space to play with family members, to play with maybe friends, but at a safe distance, so that they learn to interact with one another once again, they learn to cooperate with one another, and in doing so, when they form those relations and those relationships are maintained, that again reinforces that sense of belonging and self-esteem. So some of the things I'm just going to highlight now include what you can look out for if you're particularly worried about your child, and whether or not, for example, their levels of anxiety, frustration have kind of bubbled over to a more complex level, if you like. And so some children may display quieter behaviour than normal. Some children may display more aggressive behaviour. And if that's the case, sometimes a child being more withdrawn is just as important as if a child is displaying highly aggressive means. Some children that have more developed language skills, for example, may engage in more verbal conflict with their family members, may become more argumentative, may become less likely to respond positively to adults' instructions, disciplines. And this may be a sign that there's something underlying going on here in terms of the child not feeling safe in their current routine, or, for example, there are external factors which are really impacting the child's self-esteem and overall well-being. And so at that time, it's about trying to reflect, take a moment, talk with your partner or another family member to give you a space to reflect as an adult about what could be going on and what small steps can be taken to try and help them. I'm going to now hand over to Lorna for a bit to talk a bit more.
Thank you very much, Patrick. So in the following talk, I just want to kind of raise the point that you as a parent know your child best. You're the expert on your child, but these are some suggested strategies of how to manage the situation at the moment, in particular with your child going back to school. So we just want to share with you some sort of practical strategies and suggested skills for this transition time as children get ready to go back in September. So we're now sort of middle of August, so to think about talking about school with your child or children in a really sort of positive way, talk about how they might have been missed, and talk about what they're looking forward to. You can ask what I'm looking forward to going back to. Think about anxiety and stress. So as adults, it can be a particularly stressful time, the transition going back into school, but to really kind of normalise the feelings with them and to say that it has been a tricky time with lockdown, but I'm pleased to say that we're all together and the school are open for you and that they want to keep you as safe as possible. So discussing modelling and sort of really kind of getting to a point where you feel that actually the way you're managing your anxiety about the situation is stable and that you're able to offer some reassurance to your child about it. So really have a think about, how your school, your child's school best, that they'll be doing their best, their very best to make everyone safe come September. And if it's helpful to repeat the consistent messages that we know have worked for your child, so things like washing your hands frequently, then maybe repeating that as they're sort of preparing to go back to school. Again, it's a very practical strategy. Making sure that those messages are clear and consistent. So if your school have a particular message that they're giving out to their children and parents, that you two are also repeating that message. Having a think about how in the lead up to September start, is there anything that your child in particular finds helpful for managing their anxiety and stress, and making sure that's part of your daily routine at the moment. Perhaps it's about making sure they go to the park every day, they get a bit of exercise. So having some movement breaks, ensuring that is happening before they start school. And then actually when they are in school, if there's anything after school that you want to continue to do to help manage their anxiety, then definitely keep doing that. You might find your child is more tired, and that's completely understandable. But if you feel there's something particularly good that they're doing at the moment, then don't end that just because the school gets finished. And we all know that emotional well-being is linked to sort of physical well-being as well. And just having to think about, other than you as a parent, are there other adults in your child's life that they could actually talk to and in a reassuring way, and be able to kind of feel that their anxiety is contained by that person. And if you aren't already part of a parent group, perhaps in your local community, think about maybe joining one and see how other parents are also managing this tricky time at the moment. I'm sure schools will have sent out guidance on the return, so again, familiarise yourself with any guidance that is happening with your local school. Now, Patrick and I also thought it would be helpful to look specifically at one way at managing your child's anxiety or stress levels, and this relates to the idea and the concept of emotional coaching. Now, as we say, you're the expert on your child, you know your child best, but it's just a sort of refresher, the next few points of refresher on how to provide successful emotional coaching for a child or for a younger person. Now, the age of your child will vary, so just to think about adapting it in terms of the language used according to their age. So as we're nearing September, becoming particularly aware of your child's emotions, so observing them, looking at times of the day where maybe they're coming across as more anxious or more stressed, and watching out for any changes as we're nearing the return to school. When they do talk to you, making sure you're all ears, that you're looking at them and you're giving them that time to listen to them if they are talking about being nervous or apprehensive about returning to school. Thinking about your body language and your tone of voice when the topic of returning to school comes up. And if it's helpful and you feel your child can understand it, it's naming that emotion. So you can say, I can see you're excited and maybe a little bit nervous about going back to school. Can you talk to me a bit more about this? And then thinking finally about if there's a particular problem that they're worried about returning to school. Is it about seeing their friends? Is it about being in a classroom? Sit down with them and talk about that in a little bit more detail. If you have an idea of how the school have managed the return, so are classes smaller, are desks spaced out more so, then let them know what you know about the new school environment. So questions to think about when you are sitting down with your child and having a discussion about returning to school in relation to COVID-19 is reflecting back what they say to you. So I'm feeling that you're feeling a little bit worried. I'm thinking about whether you're thinking about ... X, Y, and Z. Talk about how they may be, you could even insert a feeling if you think that's what the feeling might be, and let them say yes or no to that feeling. Perhaps say, maybe I'm wrong, but is this how you're feeling about returning to school? Allowing that space for you and your child to connect around the topic, and sort of be aware that you're giving them the space as well to talk about their feelings, perhaps. So we like to talk about the idea of when you're sitting down with a child and they might be coming across as particularly anxious or stressed, that perhaps you could be a bucket for their emotions and which you contain, so you offer containment. And that way they may feel more heard, and once they've spoken to you, they may feel that their emotions are not as overwhelming as they were when they first began talking to you. So we like to talk about the concept of being containing and containment. So have a think as well about reflecting over lockdown. You know, there's obviously been some very challenging times that have occurred because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also think about some of the positives, and they may feel like a distant memory now, but your children and you might have been part of community sort of initiatives. So they're thanking the NHS, you may have done some rainbow posters, you may have been part of a viral community scheme, you might have done sort of a local get together of sorts online. So really sitting down with them and reflecting, well, actually what positives came from lockdown? Would they like to share anything? Did they get to spend more time with mum and dad? Did they take up any new hobbies? And really sitting down and think about it, and maybe you could journal it together and actually really kind of focus on some of the good bits that perhaps have come out from this period of time. Well, as Patrick said, there will be a new routine. So is it about like you now thinking, how are we going to introduce this new routine? You know, do we actually want to do a new chart at home? Do you actually want to specifically say, this is what we'll be doing in the morning and this is what we'll be doing in the evening? So allowing them to visualise how a new way of being will be come September. And I think also that reminding them that what school is also about, you know, and actually, you know, for them, March might seem a very, very long time ago, and the same for you. So thinking about the positives that they had in school prior to lockdown could also be really, really helpful for them. Now, we touched upon this in last week's session, but we want to also refresh everyone who's listening today that it's about also, as an adult, looking after your own well-being. Because unless you look after your own well-being, it's very, very challenging to then try and look after someone else's well-being. So keep in mind, what can you do as an adult to manage your anxiety about your child going back to school? Perhaps you have a mantra that you want to say to yourself and remind yourself that the school will be doing their best with the maybe limited resources that they have, or with plenty of resources that they have. But that everyone is wanting everyone to stay safe. And we wouldn't be allowing the children to be going back to school if adults didn't think it could be a safe experience. So reminding yourself perhaps of that, but also having an idea of what you can do as activities. So think of healthy ways of managing stress. Does that involve exercise? Does that involve talking to someone? Does that involve having a hot bath every evening? Really having in mind and doing it and applying it, ideally, as frequently as you can as your child is getting ready to go back to school. And talking to other parents, linking up to peer support as well, really thinking about what else have you got in terms of your support network already and trying to utilise that. And we'd also like to sort of share with you that there is a need, I suppose, to reflect on COVID-19 overall. So for yourself as an adult, what have you taken away as a positive? So not just what your child might have taken away from it, but how do you feel? What has actually been a benefit to this situation, which has been very, very challenging across many lives? And maybe keep hold of that. Is there anything that you can keep hold of that going forward in your day-to-day life? What we'd like to do is also share with you, and we'll put it onto the Facebook group, some websites that your child, so that they are child appropriate. And we have various different links of websites and resources, including apps, that we would like to share with you at the end. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm not going to speak this much now because I think the interference is coming from my end. So Lorna is going to look through some of the questions and answer, and if there's things we can't answer right now, we will put up some links and write up on the Facebook page some of the answers.
Yeah. So unfortunately I can't see the questions, Patrick. Is there any way that you can show me the...
Yeah. So someone asked earlier on, how can children be safe at school? I think because of the difficulty with being away from each other and staying away from each other. And then there was another question about, they've said about medication here. I'm not sure if they mean with regards to medication for coronavirus, for example. So maybe we could answer the first one about how children may be safe if they're supposed to be staying apart.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for the person who's question. So how can children remain safe if they're due to be kept apart? Now, every school is different and every school will have their own guidance and policy around this. So it's really believing in that system, it's believing in your school that they have actually got systems in place that will allow the children to be there safely. And one of the key things to think about for your own child, it is about reminding them about cleansingness. So the hand washing, we know is proven to reduce the rate of infection from COVID-19. You know, in a school context, the social distancing will be a real challenge, but they will be monitoring everyone's well-being in school. So my understanding is that the temperature will be taken for children. So that is a quick response, and obviously all the parents will be let know that if any child has got a temperature, and then the school will take it to the next stage. So it is a case at the moment that there are no certainties for how schools are going to manage it, but they will be doing their very best to manage it in the best way that they can.
And I think that independent some schools within certain classes, within certain year groups, there may be a little bit more overlap because we're at a stage where more people are able to interact than they were months ago. So even if your child is having some contact or closer contact with another child in their class, that's still somewhat different to maybe what they would have had last year, whereby they may have been on the playground with many, many other children. So I think if you do hear stories from your child, rather than become anxious and panic, it's to also, in a calm way, seek factual answers from the school itself. Because I think sometimes you may hear a story from your child and it not be the full picture, and then you can become highly anxious, and then in some ways anxious without any real grounding, which isn't what you want. So if you do have some confusion, if you are unsure, I think it's best to calmly make contact with the school to ask questions and to find out what is going on around.
And my understanding is that there are going to be a lot of staggered starts, and that they're going to be creating bubbles as well. So that is two other actions that is aiming to keep your child as safe as possible.
And I think, you know, as well as going back to school, which is a really positive next step for many children who haven't been in school or haven't been in their early year setting, you know, once people feel comfortable and safe doing that, it's also about maintaining connections for your children with their friends, with their peers outside of school, and that might be done more remotely. So it may be that because they go to school in settings, that's enough physical contact for themselves and as a family. But again, allowing them a space to maybe chat with their friends over the phone, for example. It might be that you can go to the park and allow a child to engage in a game where they don't have to be in close proximity. So I think once children kind of settle back into school, it would be nice then to allow them opportunities to engage with learning opportunities, engage with friendships, also outside of the school context. And I think once people start to do that step by step, people's overall anxieties about COVID-19 will reduce to a more, I suppose, reduce to a level which makes us feel that we can manage it, a more manageable level. Because I think with all the unknown and not yet being at a place where we're in school, there's a lot of what if, and until we're actually in school, those questions can't be fully answered.
Yeah, and actually, this just to add to that, Patrick, thank you for sharing that. Is that you may or may not be aware, but anxiety levels can increase with the amount of media watching that occurs, and that's to keep it in mind that a lot of news, although informative and is wanting to share the truth, can also be sensation seeking. So if you're finding watching the news your anxiety levels are increasing, then maybe consider reducing the amount of material that you watch that is provided by the media at this current time.
Thank you. So people may have questions that they think about after watching this. And again, if there are questions, please post onto the Playgroup page, and I know that the administrators of that page will forward the questions on to us, and we'll do our best then to answer them. And I believe that it's hoped that there will be another live session potentially next week, which Laura and I will also be joining, looking more at safety of children and safety of families going forward, and thinking about certain practices that the NHS are also trying to push out there to get us all to follow. So some of those questions will come back, I think, up in that topic, which we can try and answer again in a little bit more detail with other speakers who also have more knowledge in this area. So thanks for joining us today. Sorry for the background noise. Hopefully you've been able to understand most of it. We will post up notes from the session today, as well as the session last week, and we'll kind of put them together if you like, so it's kind of complementing each other, and that should go up. We'll send that to the administrator of the Playgroup Facebook page, and that should hopefully go up then within the next week. So thank you for watching, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you all. Bye bye.